This is the Change Physician, episode 136. Welcome back to the Change Physician. I am Melissa K.D., the Challenge Doctor, with my Amazeballs co-host, Dr. Kevin A.D.K.A.R, and mutually Amazeballs guest, Tim Creasey. And we are going to talk about an Amazeballs topic called change. And we'll give you a little bit more information on that. Obviously, change is extremely important for not only us as individuals, but organizations. And around the timing of this recording, of course, this pandemic era, I should say, has been that I don't know if that was a slip, but there's a lot of change that's been going on, really difficult for individuals and organizations to deal with. But as physicians, there's a lot of changes that we need to implement to better our lives or to deal with changing policies. But many of us have businesses or organizations where we're trying to make a difference in the organization to change it or shift it. But as we'll probably get into a little bit, individuals are required to change within that organization to be effective at changing that organization. So I don't want to go into too much detail because Tim, you're here to help dive into a little bit of your story, what you have to do with this whole model or method called A.D.K.A.R, which I found interesting. And I'd love for you to just give a little background and then go into maybe what A.D.K.A.R is and whatever other details need to be discussed with it.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think, yeah, you're exactly right. Change is all around us. And over the last couple of years, we've been forced to deal with all kinds of externally triggered, instantaneous, involuntary change. But every one of us, whether it's at home or in a community group or at the office, has change that we're trying to navigate. So as an organization, Prosci focuses on how do we help individuals and organizations build the capabilities they need to deliver more successful results and outcomes in times of change. And I think if we roll it back, I think there's just a really important conceptual foundation we want to get laid, right? And that's that every change has two sides, kind of like a coin, which makes it fun for visuals in my presentations. But every change has a technical side and a people side. The technical side of the change is designing, developing, delivering the solution to meet our need or our opportunity that's in front of us. But the people side of that change is that solution is engaged with, adopted, and used. And I have to have both of those sides of the coin, or else I am not going to create the value out of this change that I was taking on. And electronic health records in healthcare is one of these prime examples where the technical side of the change is getting the buttons to work, and sure enough, they always work. The people side of the change is what we do to ensure that doctor doesn't throw the tablet across the room when they're being asked to engage with it in a new way, because we've left the people side of change to chance. We often invest all kinds of time and energy into the technical side of change, and we leave that people side of change completely up to a roll of the dice. And so that's really what we do as a business. Is we've done a couple of decades of research to inform it, but how can you be more thoughtful and intentional with helping that people side of the change come along? Because we know we need both it and the technical side if we're going to achieve successful outcomes. So I think that's an important foundation, right? Before we jump into the nuts and bolts of the people side, do you watch this technical side, people side of change play out? Any of the changes that y'all, run into regularly in your?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the E.H.R part is there's implementation, and we see this on organizational scale with healthcare extraordinarily, like where they just focus on these new technological bits. And like you said, they forget about the people that are involved. And as a physician, I think the most frustrating thing with the E.H.R was the fact that the people who were designing these systems weren't necessarily physicians. And so they forget that the user, how is this end user going to be applying this? So I'll never forget, like then they're implemented and they're like, oh, this is what you need to do. And then me or a colleague, we were like, well, you have to click this and this and this. And they go, well, all we need to do is we're going to implement this new change thing. And then we'll just add, we have to click over here. And it's like, well, now I have to click this and this and this and this. Yeah. And like, but it's just one more click. And you'd say the same thing. It's like, it's another click. And they would repeat it back to you. Well, yeah, it's just one more click. But that one click could be 30 seconds, 40 seconds, add a minute onto the encounter. And then that can actually set this whole system off. So I'm going to be fascinated on how you talk about that people side.
Yeah.
But from a personal standpoint, how is it that you got involved in this process? What was your story when it came to change, and then in getting involved in this particular method?
Yeah, great question. So Prosci is the name of the firm. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer, so I lead the thought leadership research development side of the house. I've actually been here for 20 years. So I stepped right into Prosci as an organization. At that time, our focus was really on business process reengineering and call center and HR management. We were founded by an engineer, though, and yeah, right. The people side of change by a mechanical engineer, right, with master's degree in mechanical engineering. But he realized I've optimized this process. I've done it beautifully. I know exactly how much cost should be driven out. And then people kept getting in the way. People just kept getting in the way. And so, founded by this real curious engineer, right? He started to ask the question, well, why are we doing the things that we're doing to try to bring our people along? And that's where he sort of invented the A.D.K.A.R model. I joined about 20 years ago when we only had some research reports and some binders, toolkits, and then have helped us really evolve that solution portfolio into a whole host of training, but also advisory services and tooling to help people build the people adoption strategies and plans they need to run alongside the projects they work on. Yeah. The wild thing, and we're talking about medical and we're talking about electronic health records as an example, human beings are the one universal common denominator in change across industry, across geography. So what's been really interesting in my role is I've helped a manager of a small team of creative visual communicators bring a little bit of process to how they work. And we helped the US military reallocate 250,000, troops around the planet during base reallocation and closure. So the people side is it is the universal common denominator. We can scale it when we start to move into big change, but at the core is understanding how one person navigates a change more successfully. And that's going to be the A.D.K.A.R model. Melissa, if you want to start to tip into
sure.
A.D.K.A.R.
Yeah. And so just to make a point, Jeff Hyatt was the person that developed the A.D.K.A.R method is what you're speaking of.
Yeah, right. That's Prosci's founder and the inventor of the A.D.K.A.R model, Jeff Hyatt. Yeah.
Right. And then the research that's been almost 20 plus years you've been involved in is based on what kind of research? Like what did that,
yes.
What's that based on?
So it tips into more of the practice of change management. On a particular project, what are the things we need to make sure we do right or avoid doing wrong to build good change management into that initiative? And so every 2 years, we do these longitudinal studies where we ask project practitioners how things are going. I'll give you an example, right? Here's one of the questions we love asking. What's the biggest mistake you watched a senior leader do when they were trying to implement a change? And so Kevin and I could go drink some nice Oregon microbrews and talk about his experience. And he would give me one story of a senior leader just really messing up real bad. If I asked 10 people that question, I might start to see a couple of patterns. Now we've asked about 7,000 people that question, and we really start to deduce out the most common mistakes senior leaders make when they ineffectively sponsor change. And is there a chance your sponsor will make an error outside of those? Absolutely. But we've been able to really distill down. These are, from a Pareto perspective, an 80-20, these are the biggest moving parts, the biggest sources of resistance, the biggest steps middle managers need to take, the most important messages to communicate early on and change messages. And we've built out that library and inventory of understanding and then folded it into an executable methodology that people use on projects.
Okay. So when it comes to, did you have anything, Kevin? I was going to dive into A.D.K.A.R.
No, I think that's the perfect place to go into what is A.D.K.A.R and what is this methodology?
Yeah, there's the question.
Very good. So what is A.D.K.A.R? Great one. So A.D.K.A.R is a results-oriented model to the question, what are the building blocks somebody needs to make a change successfully? Like, what do I need to do to help somebody? What are the blocks they need to have to step forward out of where they are today through that messy transition to get to the new way of doing things? So A.D.K.A.R is an acronym, A.D.K.A.R. It's awareness of the need for change, desire to participate and support the change, knowledge on how to make the change, the ability to implement those new skills and behaviors, and finally, reinforcement to sustain the change and make sure it sticks. So awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. And I'm going to offer up, we're going to turn it on its head and use some I statements, and then we can start to unpack each of those I statements. Because it's an outcome-oriented model. It describes what a person achieves when they successfully navigate the change. So if somebody has sufficient awareness, they would say, I understand why. If they have sufficient desire, they say, I've decided to. I know how to, I'm able to, and I'll continue to. So that's our goal now, right? We've reoriented the way we think about bringing this change to my clinic and the 5 people that are going to have to bring it to life. I think about, how do I help each of them get to, I understand why, I've decided to, I know how to, I'm able to, and I'll continue to.
Yeah. So
I've heard about this, or I'm not sure if it was this model, but I've heard of those steps before.
Yeah.
So was that the Prosci method? Was that where that was first published, or was there some research based on that? Because those are also points where you're looking at specific targeted intervention for change at each of those, because each of those points is addressed differently.
For sure. You're exactly right. So it's called the Prosci A.D.K.A.R model. So Jeff invented it and published it in 2000 in an article called The Perfect Change. But certainly inspired by, and right, Kevin, if we go back to the notion that the individual human being is the universal common denominator in change, a lot of these different change models give very similar overlapping perspectives in terms of how we help somebody move out of where they are today to doing something differently. A.D.K.A.R gives us a real accessible way to start to anchor into each of those 5 building blocks. So we'll pick each one up in order, right? For example, let me circle back to one thing you said that I think is really important, that A.D.K.A.R helps us diagnose the symptom of why the change is stuck so that we can come up with a better diagnosis for how to help that person move forward. So awareness of the need for change. It means that it's not that I know that EHR is coming. It's that I have internalized why it's happening, why it needs to happen now, and what's the risk if we don't bring this into the organization. So it's an internalization, answering why now, what if we don't? It's the very first step into a change, is that I have accepted there's a need to change and have stepped into awareness. So then we can start talking about, if there's changes that are getting stuck because of a lack of awareness, why does that happen, right? Credibility of the sender, misinformation in the system, contestability of the reason, but it helps us really start to understand and unpack, how do I help somebody get to the first building block, awareness of the need for change, so that they would tell us, I understand why.
I think that's where some people might be like, in, I guess, refusal or denial, that they like the way things are, that they just don't perceive. Like you said, they kind of basically are not agreeing.
Oh, for sure. And, William Bridges, one of the grandfathers in this discipline, talks about the psychological risk associated with acknowledging something needs to change, right? That's a big pill to swallow, to say, I understand why a change is needed, especially if it's something that I'm already struggling, maybe even just in my own head, around acknowledging that it's something that needs to change.
Yeah.
So why now, what if we don't? And if I feel like I'm stuck at awareness, what do I need to be able to say, I understand why?
Yeah.
It's kind of reflective, right? What is it that I'm going to need satisfied to be able to say, okay, I've bought into why this is needed.
Yeah.
After
That's a marketing point too, for an organization. Because if you're going to drive some sort of external change, and I think this oftentimes seems to get missed, is if you have to then touch on that level of awareness to get the participants to understand the needs, the reason why to change.
Yeah.
And super important step. I could see where, otherwise like, well, why am I doing this? It's just some admin guy telling me to click another button.
like wearing masks too. But anyway, that's another topic.
Yeah, the why has to have, and the interesting thing, right? Crises can be the initial reason for why, but they can't be the long-term sustaining transformational reason for why. And so a lot of our clients are really struggling in this navigating, reimagining the workplace, because again, the initial why has either gone away or has been relaxed, or there's got to be a new different why, right? So that's awareness of the need for change, where it starts. The second is desire to participate and support the change. And that's the personal decision. We are all beings with free will. We have the decision to step into this change or not. And so desire is that personal decision. It's based on what we call WIFM, what's in it for me, organizational motivators, personal motivators, how much this aligns with where I see I'm trying to go. The interesting thing is a lot of change folks, when they see the A.D.K.A.R model and learn it the first time, will say, desire's got to be the hardest one to make happen. Wow, desire is that's got to be the most challenging of the building blocks. But if I look actually back into the research around where the greatest source of resistance is coming from, it's that nobody made a compelling case for why the changes were needed in the first place. Awareness is actually the root cause of a lot of the resistance organizations face, because they don't step into answering why now, what if we don't? But desire becomes the one we kind of point to and say, yeah, that one's going to be tricky. Interesting thing about desire, it's completely unique and individual, right? So I use this example of, the seatbelt campaigns, click it or ticket, right? So I have a picture of some of these different road signs that you'll see. One of them says, click it or ticket, it'll save your life. The next one says, click it or ticket, it's the law. The next one, and it's from Oregon, is where I saw it first, said click it or ticket, or it's $142, right? And then I was down in Colorado about 2 years ago, driving up E470 from the airport up to our headquarters. And on the reader board, the one that can change up above the road, it said, your seatbelt's not clicked? Seriously? And so, right? The change they want me to make is buckle my seatbelt, but they're appealing to my, authority, safety, financial shame at the end. Because desire is going to be completely personal, but we need to, as a change agent, we can start to step into and understand what are those motivators and how they bump into or run up against the change we're trying to help somebody through.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously knowledge is the next step.
Yep. So knowledge is the third, and it's the knee-jerk default is knowledge, right? You want somebody to make a change, what do? Send them to training. Give them this one page of instructions, right? Put them through that tutorial. We often jump to knowledge, and knowledge is necessary, but not sufficient. It has to come on the back of awareness and desire. Because if I don't have awareness and I don't have desire, this knowledge is going to go in one ear and out the other. And we've all been sent to training programs, a knowledge program where we didn't have the awareness and desire why we were there in the first place, right? And we sit in the back thinking about what we're going to make for dinner that night. So knowledge has to have context, awareness and desire first. And we need to help build the knowledge of what to do during and after the change. It's not just here's what the new system does. It's, we're going to be in a period of transition. There might be dual systems. You might have some behaviors or habits you're going to have to temper down as you step into the new. So knowledge is a journey, not an event, but it has to come within that context.
Yeah, and it seems like as you see in any personal wellness pursuit, whether you're a physician or not, humans in general, there's so much knowledge. I mean, just look at, we're in the internet age. There's anything you want to know, it's out there. But it always seems like an emotional, cognitive, emotional kind of, maybe an emotional fear that people are not capable of implementing that knowledge into action. And they don't have the competence yet to build that confidence. And I wonder if that's kind of where that goes to in the next, on the ability side of things.
Yep. So you've highlighted exactly that step between knowledge and ability, right? Because ability is the demonstrated capability to show up in the new way that I can do what needs to be done differently. And my golf game is the example I give to illustrate the point you just made. And you only have to go for one hole, not even a round of 18 with me. Because I know how to approach the ball. I know how to bend my knees. I know I'm supposed to keep my head down. I know I'm supposed to keep my head down. I just know I'm supposed to keep my head down, but I have not refined the ability to keep my head down yet. So all I do is spend all day off in the rough on the right-hand side. The gap between knowledge and ability is different for every one of us, and it's different for different changes that we're trying to step into, right? To make some very gross generalizations about people's comfort level with technology, you could have a hospital where you have, a 79-year-old doctor who is about to retire and a 29-year-old physician who has been on a screen the entirety of their life. Each of them have different knowledgeability gaps when we step into some of these, digital solutions. And so each of us, depending on the change we're being asked to make, have a different knowledgeability gap. We might also have ability barriers, actual inhibitors of ability. And those could be psychological, they could be actual capabilities, they could be on the calendar, that meeting got moved to 7:30 every morning, but I have to get my kid to school. Now there is an ability barrier for me to step into a meeting, making it to that meeting. And we refine ability through practice and coaching and mentoring once we define what it means to show up differently and step into this new way of being a contributor in this group.
So do you work through with, just curious from a business side of things, understanding this method? I know reinforcement's kind of that last part we haven't talked about, but do you typically work with just groups, organizations, and then you end up through the organization work with each individual, since it is important to go to the individual level? Or how do you facilitate the change? Obviously identifying these components, but
yeah, great question. So we talk about change management as both an individual capability. I can get better at contributing from my seat to the changes going on around me, and as a structured process and approach we apply to projects and initiatives. So that's where it would often happen. We have a hospital system of 12 hospitals. They're all rolling out an E.H.A.R system. It's going to go live in Hospital 1 as the pilot. We would come in with that project team and say, while you're building all of those design, develop, deliver, the technical side of the coin components, you need to start thinking about that people side. How do we start to build communication approaches, the training strategies, getting senior leaders to step in and sponsor the program? People managers become a really critical role inside of organizations too. Probably the most important and neglected ally in times of change is the people managers throughout the organization that have the proximity to the people that are bringing the change to life, but also are leaned on as agents of change. They often get neglected. We often forget to help that group through their own change journey first before we ask them to take charge and help their folks through change.
So question off that, there's so much dysfunction in management in so many areas. Like, do you find yourself up against a wall and having challenges with implementing change because of their already dysfunctional situation?
Yeah, it's a holistic system, right? It takes a village to run an organization or to bring about change. And so I would consider them as more constraints or realities of the environment in which this change is being brought to life. And so that's how we would kind of think about it. I'll often sort of define, change leadership is deciding where to go and how to get there. Project management's deciding what we need to get there, or building what we need to get there. Change management is how do we help our people get there too. And if we're in an organization where we have deficiencies of change leadership, we're struggling around setting a direction, we're struggling around staying appraised to the shifting conditions, we're struggling with making sense of internal change that we did on our own, as well as the outside change that's being done to us. A lack of change leadership direction will never be made up for by better change management. It's really those, same with project management and the technical side, right? No matter how much good change management we bring to a project, if it's trying to bring about a technical solution that is, like Kevin was saying, right? They put the buttons in the wrong place. I had a buddy that was working doing E.H.A.R work, and the guy who was designing the screen didn't know that the width of the screen it was going to be viewed on was smaller than the width he was designing on the whole time, right? So you end up with a scroll bar everywhere. And that's because we didn't bring adoption and usage to the table from the beginning, right? I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. It's a personal story outside of work, but we'll be able to bring it in here. So I'm in Boise, Idaho. We have splash pads. We're in the high desert, so it actually gets really hot here in the summer. So at the local parks, there'll be these splash pads. Water shoots up, the kids run around and get all cooled off. They had put in this brand new, huge park with this gigantic, beautiful splash pad. It was painted like this big, beautiful starburst. And I take my two boys there a week after it opens and the water's turned off. And my son goes, "Can I go find out why the water's not on?" He runs through every boundary ever set for him, right? This is his style as a 6-year-old, is going to the head of the park to find out what's wrong. And I said, "Sure, go ahead." And he goes up and asks the gentleman who runs the park. And he said, "Well, it turns out the paint that we use gets slippery when it gets wet." We didn't know that going in. So we turned it on the first day and kids are just,
Oh no.
right? Which is sad. And then, so then they spend a couple of months to scrub all the paint off. And to this day, probably 5 years later, it's now just still a big cement pad. And it's kind of sad when we think about how much money and time was spent, but then you start thinking about inside your organization, in the changes that you're working to bring about. How often are you bringing a technological solution that uses paint that gets slippery when it gets wet to a splash pad because you never thought about the people who are going to have to use the solution when you brought it to life? So, and Melissa, it's interesting, ability is where that intersection happens, right? So ability in the A.D.K.A.R model is where we describe how people have to show up each day differently. We want to make sure the technological solution we designed actually enables them to do that. And then the very last piece, we might as well close out the model, because I do make the joke that Prosci would be a complete failure if Jeff would have invented that A.D.K.A.R model and forgot the R. Because the reality is most of the time we forget the R, right? That R is reinforcement, because we know it's our natural, psychological, physiological tendency to go back to what we've always done.
Yeah.
So if we want to stay in this new state that we've worked so hard to get to, we have to be intentional about making sure that we reinforce and stay there. And that's measurements, it's celebrations, it's auditing compliance, it's corrections when things aren't there. But if Jeff would have invented A.D.K.A.R like most change happens in organizations and forgot the reinforcement, Prosci would have been a failure, but he put that anchor there so we can make sure that we're being intentional about how to close out change and help people stay in that new place they worked hard to get to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird because it's, you see it even in groups I've worked with that if it's not newly changed, I mean, there might be reinforcement right away, but there needs to be a little bit extra. And although sometimes the defense had been, you should be doing this anyway, or, you should be doing it because it's the right thing to do, or it's just, but, if they don't have ownership in the company, or that, there's a little bit less drive to maintain that, like you were talking about. So yeah, I think it would be very difficult to implement change. I have another question, but Kevin, do you have anything to add or ask?
Yeah, a couple of things regarding the reinforcement point, because you can take this model, which I just think is brilliant, this the A.D.K.A.R model: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And you can put it on a micro level from individual. So individual change is a very similar path where you have to have awareness of that particular change. Do you want to change? That you have to have knowledge about it, the ability, et cetera. And then, as you said, the reinforcement piece. But when it comes to organizations, my suspicion is, while all of these can be particularly difficult, the reinforcement side could be profoundly difficult because of the short-term attention spans that people have. And I'm thinking from the healthcare side, where they're moving metrics like every year. It's like, well, this is our new focus. It's like, if you want to make an impact on child health, that's something that you're going to need to look at a long-term investment in planning so that you reinforce those behaviors, rather than knowing in a year we're going to switch the metrics or whatever our new benchmarks are. So I'm kind of curious, with the work that you've done organizationally, what have you found as the main challenge points? And then if it is reinforcement or around there, what are tools that you've found for organizations to really highlight and then drive that change and reinforce it so that actually is maintained, rather than, get consultants in, they do this thing, and then 2 months later it's all gone?
Yeah. Great question and observation. And I think you're right that not only the attention span, but also all the stuff going on right now creates tremendous pressure on sustainment of change after it happens, right? Like, I got 99 problems, and sustaining the change that got launched last week is not one of them, right? Is probably what life feels like. So in terms of what we can do, to anchor up against this challenge, I actually think this is a leadership governance issue. That it's tied, and that the issue is tied to what are we considering done? What is the finish line that we're all running toward? And the challenge is, if we define the finish line is on time, on budget, meeting technical requirements, well, we've defined the finish line several laps too short, right? Everyone knows that after go live, on time, on budget, meeting requirements, we still have the hard work of actually helping people to step into and be effective and productive using the new system that we've implemented. So Kevin, what we do is at the very beginning, try to anchor to a better definition of success. What are the actual organizational benefits? What are the project objectives? And how would we know if we've delivered them? And we get them declared from the very beginning. And as soon as we elevate to what does the organization actually get out of this change, if we implement it, we move out of the buttons are in the right place, and we get to the place where our physicians are providing, effective, high caliber, quick, whatever the I was just starting to make up an objective of change, but
I like that one though. It was pretty
yeah,
good.
it was right. I was starting to anchor. My team, one of the phrases my team hears more than anything on our internal work is to what end? To what end? And it means, what are we actually trying to achieve here? What is the actual outcome? How do we want somebody to think, feel, act differently as a result of their engagement with this thing? And so the better we can anchor to the outcome, the more often we can align, I think, around how we might start to get there. And also, it gives us the space to calculate in the work to sustain, because that time to sustain value from go live to we're actually doing a good job using this thing, getting the results we expected. If that's an unseen time on the calendar, nobody's paying attention to it. Nobody's resourcing for it. Nobody's thinking about it. So,
yeah.
Sorry, I had to mute out some loud noise out there. If you don't have another question to follow that, Kevin, I was going to ask kind of one of the last questions regarding an individual.
Well, I have so many questions. I'm going to hold my questions because I know we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, that's fine.
Instead, I'm going to say, Tim, we're going to have you back because there's so much more we can delve into. And then I'm let Melissa's last question here. I'll just stop because I know.
Yeah, I'll ask this last question, and I'll let Kevin take us out. But on an individual level, because our podcast called The Changed Physician, and many of us are trying to make, as humans in general, we're all trying to make some positive changes in our lives. And if there was anything from all the years of your research and doing presentations and whatnot, I mean, obviously the A.D.K.A.R method gives you kind of some breakdown of important pieces, but what's kind of the biggest takeaway you've had of, or most important thing for people to realize or really put more energy into when it comes to trying to making a change for themselves?
All right. So it's going to be a little bit outside of the A.D.K.A.R, right?
That's okay.
But so here's the thing that I think this is my big question I'm working to unlock. And it's about being on the same page with somebody. So, and think about a 2x2 quadrant, right? If we're on the same page and we know it, we're good to go, right? If we're on the same page, but we thought we were on different pages, I call that the facepalm moment, right? We were on the same page the whole time, but we thought we were on different pages. And finally we realized, oh, we were on the same page the whole time. And we go, oh, Kevin, that's what I meant the whole time. And he goes, oh, that's what I meant to. If we're on different pages and we know it, that's fine too, right? That just means keep working at it. The worst, the most devastating, the one that I see creates so much challenges is when we think we're on the same page, but we're not. We think we're on the same page. We're both doing the work we think we should be doing towards the same place we're trying to get to, but we were never on the same page to begin with. And that's debilitating. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to come up with ways to get on the same page with people quicker. Because nobody has time to be running around, and it gets dangerous when we end up not on the same page, especially in the environment you all are playing in, right? And so that clarity, the speed at which and level of fidelity that we can get on the same page with somebody else is sort of my personal passion.
Yeah, well, it sounds like Kevin's personal passion, because that's really awareness of being on right on the same page. Right, Kevin?
There's a whole nother conversation there. So I'm just
Yeah.
going to keep my mouth shut because I know we're limited on time.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. Super interesting.
Yeah, it's one of things we always come back to, Tim, is this idea of awareness. And if you don't have awareness, it's hard to implement any change, period. You didn't even get the first step done.
So it's even more challenging than that, because it's not individual awareness. It's an awareness of individuals.
Right.
And it sounds, I mean, if you guys are listening out there and you think, well, that's easy, you just tell them. It's not, because verbal communication, any type of human communication, is imperfect. And yeah, it's super, super challenging. So
also, Kevin, communication is what gets heard, not what gets said.
Yeah.
It's never what I said, it's what you ended up internalizing. You know, people say perception is reality. And I flip it and say, no, reality is perception. Like, what you are hearing right now is not my actual voice. It's noises, vibrating little hairs in your ear that are triggering some sort of electric shock that goes into your brain that gets interpreted as noises that you're reassembling to make sense. So your entire reality is just perception to begin with. So yeah, how do we make sure that, especially when it matters, that we get on that same page to take the next step forward?
Well, that sounds
like, watch this one. Ready?
Yeah.
The most famous comedy skit of all time, right? Laurel and or Abbott and Costello, who's on first, is a whole comedy skit of two people ending up on the same page, on different pages when they thought they were on the same page, right? Like, it's amazing how often we watch this happen, where we use lazy language or bad pronouns. We leave the plane of possible interpretation open too big. We forget to add what time zone we are at, right? All of these things that open the crack for us ending up on different pages with somebody when we need to be on the same page with them. So that's my personal passion on the side.
Well, I like that personal passion, and I think it's extraordinarily fascinating. We will definitely have to have you back so we can talk about that more. But Tim, is there any specific place that people can either reach out or learn more about you and the A.D.K.A.R method, or things that you would like to target them? You know, where would you like them to go to find more about you and what you do?
Very good. So prosci.com, and it's a contraction of professional and science. We get called Prosci a lot, but it's Prosci. So prosci.com, there's loads of free tutorials, webinars, articles there. The other place I'd point, especially given, you know, your physician audience, these probably not folks that know change management inside and out. If they go to YouTube, there's a series called Tim Talks. And it's within the Prosci channel. There's one called Getting Back to the Basics, and there's another one that's an introduction to A.D.K.A.R. And both of them are really nice little 5-minute clips that just start to step into this notion of how do we be more thoughtful and intentional with that people side of the coin, because we know it's as or more important than getting the technical side of the coin right.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that we have links there, and I hope everybody who was listening got as much out of this as we did, and fantastic introduction to the A.D.K.A.R model, and particularly organizational, but also in individual behavioral change. This is obviously applicable to that. For everybody who is listening, please join us at thechangephysician.com. Like or subscribe, contact us if you have any questions that you would like to ask Mr. Creasey in the future, because we will bring you back, Tim. I'm going to hold you on that.
Very good.
All right. And until next time, folks, stay well.
Take care.